What happens when a man is collapsing in pain in the middle of the night just a few steps from his own front door, and the woman who vowed to love him along with the mother who claimed to care for him like her own stay inside, lock the door, and watch him scream for help? They didn't forget him. They chose to leave him there. People often say, "You'll know who truly loves you by how they treat you when you're at your weakest." So if the moment you could barely stand was the moment your own family turned the lock, what do you do after you survive? Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see where our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next twist in this journey. Now, let's listen to him from the heart. My name is Ethan Vance. I'm 31 years old. I wasn't born into money, but I never thought of myself as less than until the day I set foot in Newport, Rhode Island. I met Calla Sterling at a fundraising summit in Boston. She was polished in a quiet way. Clean lines, neutral tones, no need for attention. She spoke, calmly, listened well, and didn't seem impressed by pretense. I thought I was marrying someone steady, someone who could build a life with me, protect it. After we got married, I moved into her family's summer home on the coast, a cedar-shingled house perched just above the surf. From the outside, it looked like something off the cover of a magazine. But the first time I stepped inside, I had the oddest sensation, like I was being allowed to visit a museum, not enter a home. Everything gleamed. The kitchen was showroom-level, pristine marble counters, a $4,000 espresso machine, everything arranged just so. I tried to make toast the next morning and spent 5 minutes trying to figure out where the butter lived. Calla said the fridge was organized by food category alphabetically. My office, well, what was supposed to be my office, had been refined before I even arrived. The room was stunning custom oak shelves, a glass desk that seemed to hover, leather-bound notebooks laid out with surgical precision. It looked more like a stage set for a man who didn't actually live there. The walls felt like they were breathing, waiting to see what I'd disturb. I brought one thing from my old apartment in Boston, my father's old mechanical watch. It doesn't keep time well anymore, but I've had it on my desk since the day I got my first job. I placed it in the corner next to my pen cup. Calla came in, looked at it, and said softly, "I thought you'd want everything to match in here." Then she smiled, light, almost joking. I let it slide. But something in me twitched. Even that my father's watch had been registered in the list of things to adjust. That was the first hint. The second arrived the following afternoon in heels and pearls, Rowena Sterling, my mother-in-law. She didn't knock. She let herself in using a key and walked around like she was inspecting a newly acquired asset. She didn't ask how I was settling in. She didn't even sit down. She glanced around the house like she was checking inventory and then turned to Calla and said, "Good purchase." Classic lines. Well done. Then she looked at me like she was still making up her mind. In Newport, she said, smoothing her coat, reputation is the real currency. Don't forget that. Calla stood a little straighter in her presence. She didn't talk as much. She looked to her mother for silent approval in every pause. It wasn't anything loud, but it was there. When I half-joked one morning that I wanted to switch to dark roast instead of the French blend, Calla pulled me aside in the pantry and whispered, "Don't make a fuss. It's just coffee. Don't upset Mom." That sentence, "it's just," started snipping away at me piece by piece. That night I came back from a walk and found a stapled packet on the kitchen island suggested lifestyle schedule for newlyweds. It was professionally designed, branded with a soft pastel logo from a family wellness consultancy I'd never heard of. I flipped to the back. The contact name wasn't Calla's. It was Rowena's assistant. I asked Calla, "Did you ask them for this?" She hesitated, then said, "Mom sent it. She just wants us to get into a rhythm." I folded the paper in half and felt like I'd just agreed to something I hadn't had a chance to read. Later that night, lying in bed, I thought I heard the electronic lock on the front door click. Just a soft titch. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was half dreaming. But I got up, stood in the dark hallway, and looked through the glass to the porch. The wind was picking up off the water. The ocean sounded louder from here. I wrapped my arms around myself and wondered for the first time if I ever got locked out of this house. Would they even open the door? Chuanghe, after the first week I stopped trying to lead. I followed. Rowena had mapped out our social calendar like a strategist preparing for a campaign. Weekly dinners with the extended Sterling family fundraisers at the yacht club brunches that required jackets and cufflinks. I told myself this was part of marriage. You learn to blend, you show up. You build a new rhythm. But blending in here meant dissolving, becoming a placeholder. I realized that when someone at the country club leaned in with a smile and asked how's the job holding up Ethan Newport can be taxing. The concern in his voice was perfectly rehearsed, but the message beneath it was razor sharp. Can you really keep up? Rowena made suggestions about what I should wear to each function. Calla repeated them word for word, but with a softer tone like a translator easing a sharp order into a gentle nudge. Even the way I shook hands was adjusted. At a gala, Calla repositioned me by the elbow before a photo. Chin down, she whispered. You're blocking the logo. I started calling my Aunt Juniper less. Every time I did, Calla would ask afterward, what did you two talk about? Not in a curious way, in a documenting way, like she needed to know what was being said and who it was being said to. Then came the money. Calla told me not to worry about the finances. The Sterling family has a structure, she said. We don't have to do it all ourselves. A man from their family accountant's office came by with a smile and a leather folio. Just a few forms, he said. Tax optimization, account consolidation, makes things easier. I glanced at one line on the last page, primary account holder Calla Sterling Vance. I paused. Why's this in her name? The man smiled. Just for convenience. Calla said I manage things better, you know that. It's not a big deal. I told myself this was trust. This was partnership. But something inside me, the part that used to drive my own damn car, felt the steering wheel vanish. It came to a head when Rowena brought up the watch again. She stood in my office doorway, eyes scanning the room. That old clock is a bit off theme, don't you think? I turned and met her eyes. That doesn't get moved. She said nothing. Just looked at me for a beat too long, then turned her gaze to Calla, who had followed behind her like an echo. Nothing else was said. But something was logged. A few days later, I got a letter from the bank addressed to me but already opened. It was sitting neatly on the kitchen counter. I asked Calla, did you open this? She didn't blink. Mom said financial mail can get lost. She asked someone to keep an eye out. That was the first time I fully understood my private information didn't come to me anymore. It passed through someone else's hands first, and then the ground beneath me shifted for real. I was coming downstairs when I heard voices in the living room. I slowed at the top of the stairs. Rowena's voice. If he won't stay in the system, then we create a situation where he understands he controls nothing. Calla whispered something I couldn't make out. Then Rowena again. What's too much or not enough, that's for the rulemaker to decide. I stood there frozen. My hands gripped the railing. My chest felt full of stones. That night I tried logging into our joint account. The password didn't work. I tried again. A new message appeared. Pending approval from device administrator. The administrator wasn't me. I walked into the kitchen. Calla was drying a glass. Did you change the password? I asked. She didn't look up. Don't make it a thing. I'm just keeping us safe. Safe. That was the word she used. But what I felt was anything but. That night, lying awake in a house I no longer recognized, I realized something terrifying. They weren't just managing behavior here. They were managing breath. And mine was no longer mine to take. I didn't tell anyone I was in pain. Not because I wanted to play hero, but because I knew deep down, pain was the one thing I had left that still belonged to me. It started with tension in my stomach, sleepless nights, that slow burning pressure under my ribs that never quite went away. I figured it was stress. Or maybe my body just learning to grieve something my mind hadn't caught up with. I'd been grinding my teeth in my sleep, waking up drenched, gritting through the day in a house that felt like a showroom with eyes. Calla noticed. Of course she did. One morning over coffee, she reached across the counter and touched my wrist, not warmly, just efficiently, and said, "You should see someone. A real doctor. Quiet, discreet. Mom knows one." I told her I had a primary care doctor already. Someone I trusted. Someone who knew me before Newport. The next afternoon, Rowena showed up with a printed appointment card and a tone that didn't invite discussion. She placed it in my hand like a prescription and said, "Go so we can all move forward." The office was in Providence, sleek, quiet, absurdly expensive. When I walked in, the receptionist greeted me not as Mr. Vance but as Mr. Sterling. I corrected her. She blinked once and nodded like it didn't matter. Inside, the furniture was all soft lines and neutral tones. The questions they asked didn't center on symptoms. They centered on temperament. Did I ever feel irritable? Did I have mood swings? Had I ever been difficult to communicate with when under stress? I kept my answers clipped and plain. Calla sat in the corner, legs crossed at the ankle, nodding occasionally. Not once did she look at me. When I got home, there was a printout from that same appointment and a stack of gala invitations on the kitchen counter. I pulled it out. It was a treatment observation summary. My name was at the top, but the recipient field read, Rowena S. I stared at it for a long time. "Why does your mother have this?" I asked. Calla barely looked up from the stovetop. "She's just helping. Don't make it a thing." That phrase, "don't make it a thing," had started showing up more and more. But by then, the thing was making itself. Later that night, I downloaded the app for our home's smart lock system. I'd never thought much about it. Calla set most of it up when we moved in, but something inside me whispered check. I opened the admin list. 2 names, Calla Sterling, and another account labeled RS. I stood still for a full minute watching those 2 initials glow back at me. I didn't even ask why anymore. I asked how long. I asked what else. When I confronted Calla, her tone was flat. "Mom needs access in case we're not home. That's all. That was not all. That was never all." Then came Delaney's wedding announcement. Everything in the Sterling orbit shifted overnight. Rowena became a steamroller of timelines and floral schemes, and I somehow became a liability. "She needs to focus," Rowena said. "Let's avoid any distractions." Distractions meant me. My presence, my health, my tone, my posture. Calla started tracking my whereabouts. I'd mention I had lunch with an old friend and she'd already know where and when. She called it checking in. One evening, Rowena appeared with a manila folder. "Advance directive," she said. "Everyone should have one." I flipped through the paperwork. Legal language, sterile fonts. Lines about incapacitation and authorized surrogates. If I ever became unable to make sound decisions, Calla would take charge. The secondary advisor slot pre-filled with Rowena's name. "Why now?" I asked. "Because I don't like surprises," she replied, serene. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't reaction. This was choreography. Later that night, I heard Calla in the bathroom whispering into her phone. She didn't know I was up or that I could hear. "He still hasn't signed. But if he has another flare-up, Mom will handle it." I opened the hallway door. Calla stepped out like nothing had happened. There was a new security camera above the porch. A small one, sleek, aimed at the front steps like a trap waiting to be triggered. And I realized something bone deep. They weren't just preparing for the day I broke, they were planning the script for it. So I stopped reacting and started recording. Every document, every access change, every whisper. Because if they were building a case for who I was when I was sick, I'd better start building the truth of who I was while I was still clear. There comes a point where suspicion stops being paranoia and becomes preparation. That point came the morning I noticed my father's watch, my only keepsake from the life before Newport, was gone from my desk. I found it tucked into a drawer wrapped in tissue like it had been decluttered. When I brought it back out, Calla walked past and said I was just tidying up. That watch had been on that desk every day since I moved in. Calla had never touched it before. I placed it back carefully. The next day, Rowena saw it and said, "Clinging to the past can be destabilizing, Ethan." I looked her straight in the eye. destabilizing to whom she didn't blink. In this family, those who are vulnerable get managed. I'd been managed enough, so I doubled down. I created a full timeline when Rowena came over, when passwords were changed, who I spoke to, and when. I took screenshots of every setting on the smart lock system. I stored everything in a hidden cloud folder, backed it up to a USB, and tucked that into the hollow base of the watch box my dad left me. Around us, Newport spun on. We attended a charity event, a small one handpicked by Rowena to make us look stable. Calla prepped me beforehand like a campaign manager before a debate. Don't mention your stomach. Don't talk about stress. Say we're happy. Say we're aligned. She didn't want me healthy. She wanted me handled. And for the first time, I said no. I refused a doctor's appointment Rowena scheduled for me. Not rudely, just firmly. Calla didn't plead, she snapped. You make everything harder. You want Mom to think you're incapable. No, I said. Do you? There was a pause. She looked down, then up again. I want peace in this house. It wasn't peace she wanted. It was silence. A few days later, a wealth advisor from the Sterling family office came to the house. Just some routine account optimizations, he said with a smile. Paperwork for joint access device security continuity protocols. I scanned the stack. Terms I'd learned to fear: authorized contact, trusted device, secure proxy. Buried inside was a clause changing primary access to Calla's device. The emergency contact Rowena. I handed the papers back. I'm not signing this. The man shrugged. That's the Sterling standard. That evening I checked my online banking. The system had flagged a trusted device update. New authentication, new phone number. It wasn't my number. It was a burner Calla once gave me just in case. My stomach clenched. They were moving pieces without me, because they didn't need me. Then came the final blow. I was in the hallway outside the guest room when I heard Calla on the phone again. If he gets worse, do exactly what Mom told you. Don't let him call anyone. She wasn't planning for recovery. She was rehearsing containment. That night the pain in my gut returned, not dull this time. Sharp. Twisting. I sat in the dark holding my dad's watch, and for the first time, I considered leaving. Not out of fear, but because I finally understood what they feared most, me still lucid, still standing. So I started writing my own script, and the next time they pushed, I'd be ready. By then I had learned something important about survival in that house. The loudest move was silence. I stopped confronting. I stopped asking follow-up questions that led nowhere. I smiled when expected, nodded when corrected, and let Calla believe I had finally accepted the rules of her family's gravity. But underneath that surface calm, I was building exits. I bought a prepaid phone with cash at a convenience store off the highway nowhere near Newport. I never turned it on inside the house. I never connected it to our Wi-Fi. Late one afternoon, parked near the marina with my car engine running, I called my Aunt Juniper. I kept it short. Too many details would only confuse her. If I go quiet for a few days, I said, or if I start sounding off, don't believe it. Just remember this, I'm being controlled. She paused, clearly trying to catch up to what I wasn't saying. Ethan, what kind of trouble are you in? The kind where trouble looks polite, I answered. If you don't hear from me in a day or two, I need you to ask for a welfare check. Promise me. She promised, even though I could hear fear threading her voice. When I hung up, my hands were shaking, not from weakness, but from the clarity of having finally said it out loud. That evening, I tested a boundary. I want to change the door lock passwords, I said casually to Calla while she scrolled on her phone. Just so I have direct control again. She looked up too fast. Why would you need to do that? So I don't feel like a guest in my own house. Her jaw tightened. If you do that, Mom will think you're hiding something. Hiding what I asked. Whose house is this? She hesitated just long enough for the answer to land wrong. It's the family's. That single sentence settled over me like a verdict. Not ours, not mine, the family's. In the days leading up to Delaney's wedding rehearsal, Rowena intensified her attention. She brought up a new appointment with a specialist, someone who understood stress reactions and knew how to document patterns properly. Calla pressed me to go. "Please don't embarrass us right now," she said. "Everything needs to stay smooth until after the wedding." That's when I understood the timeline. The wedding wasn't a celebration. It was a deadline. The pain returned one night without warning. Not the dull ache I'd grown used to, but something sharp and violent twisting my gut until sweat soaked through my shirt. I bent forward, gasping, my vision tunneling. "Call 911, I said through clenched teeth. She didn't. Instead, she stepped away and dialed a number already saved in her phone. I saw the name on the screen when she turned back toward me, Dr. L. Rowena arrived within minutes. Too quickly, like she'd been waiting. No ambulance. Rowena said calmly, assessing me the way someone might evaluate a cracked vase. That would draw attention. Let's see if it passes. I tried to stand, my legs buckled. I reached for my phone and Calla gently but firmly took my wrist. "Don't make it worse," she said. "Just breathe." The room spun. My mouth tasted metallic. I realized then that this wasn't neglect, it was direction. "I just need air," I said. "Let me step onto the porch." Rowena nodded. "That's fine. Cold air helps." I slipped the prepaid phone into my pocket as I pushed the door open. The night air hit me hard, damp, and sharp off the water. I leaned against the railing, shaking, barely able to stay upright. With trembling fingers, I sent one text to Juniper. "If I don't reply in 24 hours, call the police. Welfare check." I forced myself back inside, slumping onto the couch, breathing shallow, playing compliant. They hovered satisfied, already moving on to the next thing on their mental list. Later, when the pain eased just enough to think, I checked the smart lock app. The access log showed activity I hadn't initiated. An admin update. Time stamped to the minute my pain had started. The admin account wasn't mine. When I asked Calla quietly, "If something really happens to me, who would you call?" she didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I'd call someone who knows how to keep things from becoming a big situation." That was the moment I understood the hierarchy clearly. My survival ranked below the family's image. The pain faded by morning, but I knew it wasn't gone. I saved screenshots of the lock logs and call history. I hid them carefully, and I went to sleep knowing one thing with certainty: the next time my body failed me, they wouldn't hesitate. The second collapse came on a night when the rain wouldn't stop. It started suddenly, far worse than before. A tearing sensation that dropped me to my knees, nausea flooding my throat, my ears ringing like alarms going unanswered. I crawled across the living room carpet, knocking into furniture, barely able to breathe. "Call 911, I said. "Now. Don't call your mother." Calla stood over me, phone in hand. She looked at my face, really looked at it for a long second. Then she turned away and dialed Rowena. When Rowena arrived, she was composed, almost serene. She said I was panicking, that I needed control, not chaos. She told Calla to put the car keys and my wallet out of reach. She lifted my phone and placed it on the top shelf of the pantry. "You're not thinking clearly," Calla said, blocking me when I reached for it. I couldn't argue. I could barely speak. "I need air," I whispered. "Please." They let me go outside. The rain soaked through my clothes instantly. I staggered onto the porch, bent over, retching my hands gripping the railing. I tried to call out, hoping a neighbor might hear. My voice cracked, broken by pain and wind. When I turned back, the door was locked. I pounded on the glass with the side of my fist. I screamed Calla's name. I begged her to open the door, to call an ambulance, to just let me back inside. Through the glass, I saw them in the kitchen. The lights were warm. The scene was calm. Rowena said something quietly. Calla nodded. No one moved. The rain blurred my vision. My strength drained away. I slid down the door frame, my forehead pressed to the cold glass, my body folding in on itself. Only when I stopped pounding, when my body simply gave up, did the door finally open. They drove me to the hospital themselves. No sirens, no urgency. In the car, Rowena leaned forward and said, "At the hospital, tell them you were anxious, that you overreacted. In the emergency room, she spoke for me while I lay shaking on the gurney. She told the nurse I had a history of panic. Calla filled in details that made me sound unstable, unreliable. I tried to speak, but my voice came out weak and broken. Then a nurse named Tamsin met my eyes. She watched how Rowena positioned herself between me and the staff. She asked me questions directly and waited for my answers. "He was locked outside," I managed to say. "They wouldn't call for help." Her expression changed, not dramatic, just alert. She documented carefully. She asked who was authorized to speak for me. When Rowena produced paperwork, Tamsin asked me directly if I agreed. "I don't," I said. "I can decide." Rowena went quiet. Later in the dim hospital room, I heard Rowena whisper to Calla in the hallway. "They need to see he's not well. After that, everything gets easier." I lay there staring at the ceiling. My body wrecked my mind clear for the first time in months. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't misunderstanding. I had been locked outside while begging for help, and I knew exactly what I was going to do next. Not tonight, not loudly, but I would leave. And this time, I would be the one holding the keys. Recovery brought clarity, not comfort. While I was still in the hospital, I asked for my records, everything. Arrival times, staff notes, who spoke for me, what was said while I was barely conscious. Tamsin helped make sure my statement was added in plain language, that I had been locked outside while in severe pain, prevented from calling for emergency help, and taken to the ER only when my condition worsened. I restricted access to my medical information, removing Rowena entirely and limiting Calla to the minimum allowed. When Rowena tried to reassert control with paperwork, the staff asked me directly. I said no. That ended it. When Calla visited, I didn't mention the porch or the lock. I apologized for making things tense and said I wanted peace before Delaney's wedding. I thanked Rowena by text for looking out for me. They believed it. They relaxed. Back at the house, I watched and recorded. I rebuilt the timeline, password changes, doctor visits, the night on the porch. I pulled the lock logs and saved copies. A neighbor's camera had caught me on the steps, bent over, pounding on the glass, while the kitchen lights glowed inside. I stored everything in layers, private cloud, external drive, and a USB hidden in my father's watch box. I opened a new bank account outside the Sterling orbit and moved the only money I controlled. I secured my email and accounts with my own devices. I met 2 lawyers, one for divorce, one for civil claims, and followed their guidance. The financial trail told its own story, changes made without my approval, emergency contacts altered, access shifted. On their advice, I requested temporary holds on shared accounts due to unauthorized changes and risk of financial abuse. Everything was logged. The last piece was Calla. In the documents, I found the incentive. If the household stayed quiet through the wedding, she would gain control of a trust allocation tied to stability. I wasn't a partner. I was a variable to be managed. I saved the evidence and stopped doubting myself. I returned home as the compliant husband. I slept early. When they left for a wedding event, I acted. A locksmith replaced every cylinder and reset the smart system. All outside admin access was removed. Remote unlocks disabled. Alerts routed only to me. The work order documented the reason: personal safety and unlawful interference. I contacted the bank and confirmed the holds. I transferred approved expenses, legal, medical, temporary housing. Every call had a reference number. I packed light. My father's watch, documents, copies. I left a letter on the kitchen table. No insults, just facts and consequences. I named the night on the porch. I stated the locks were changed and accounts temporarily frozen pending review. All contact through counsel. I ended with one line: they chose control over compassion. I chose freedom. I drove out of Newport at dawn. Calm, not triumphant. This time, no one was waiting outside a locked door. They discovered the locks first. Calls piled up. Messages followed. I didn't answer. My lawyer did. When payments failed, panic set in. Their manager confirmed the holds were valid and under review. The story they wanted to tell wouldn't stick. The letter landed. It did its work. I filed for divorce and requested temporary protections. The record spoke medical notes, lock logs, video. The court restricted interference with my care finances and residence. The narrative shifted from family conflict to documented conduct. As counsel reviewed sterling paperwork patterns, emerged funds routed through shell entities under consulting reputations guarded because exposure would be costly. I didn't threaten. I didn't need to. They understood the leverage and backed away. Calla tried once more to negotiate, warning me about reputations and careers. I asked a single question about the night she locked the door. She didn't answer. That was enough. Accounts were sorted. Access was defined. Interference stopped. In Newport, the perfect image cracked, not because I spoke, but because records did. I moved to a city where no one knew the Sterling name. I kept the watch on my desk. I stayed in touch with Tamsin and my aunt, witnesses to who I was when I couldn't speak. A letter arrived months later. No apology. Just control dressed as concern. I filed it away and closed the drawer. In my new kitchen, I made coffee the way I liked it. For the first time, home meant a place where no one could lock me out when I needed to live. I think the hardest part wasn't being shut out in the cold that night. It wasn't even the pain, the kind that tears through your body until you're not sure where you end and the suffering begins. No, the hardest part was realizing just how far people will go to protect the image of love, even when it costs them the reality of it. There's something quiet and devastating about being erased in plain sight. About being told you're cared for while your voice is turned down so low, even you start to question if it ever mattered. I lived in a house full of well-designed silences. Apologies that never came. Decisions made for me around me about me, but never with me. And I let it happen longer than I care to admit. Because when you grow up being told that love looks like sacrifice, you start to believe that hurting is part of the price you pay to belong. But there's a difference between sacrifice and submission. One comes from love. The other comes from fear. What this story taught me, and maybe what it's meant to teach if anything, is that boundaries are not a betrayal. Saying no is not cruel. Walking away is not weakness.